Members of a shadowy international group have found their way into places they should not have been. The hackers known collectively as Anonymous say they attacked several Japanese government websites. Officials at the Finance Ministry were working away when they detected an intruder. Ministry officials say they shut down part of their site after the hackers tampered with the content. The altered page included a photo of an overseas protest rally, a message opposing the restart of a nuclear plant in Japan, and another statement by the group. The hackers also got into the website of the Supreme Court. Users had difficulty accessing it for more than an hour. The hackers altered pages of the Land Ministry too. Anonymous claimed responsibility for both of those cases. Users had difficulty accessing the websites of the governing Democratic Party and the opposition Liberal Democratic Party. Anonymous released a statement on Monday protesting Japan's new copyright protection law and threatened to attack government websites. Turkey's leaders are warning Syria to beware of their country's wrath. They've put their military on high alert after Syrian forces shot down one of their warplanes. They've also asked NATO member states to get involved in the dispute. NHK World's Takashi Ichinose in Brussels tells us how the alliance is planning to respond.
Turkish rescuers have taken to the water to search for two missing pilots. Syrian forces shut down their plane Friday over the Mediterranean Sea near the border between the countries. Now leaders from both sides are exchanging words of criticism and threats. Turkish officials asked NATO to get involved. Ambassadors for the alliance member states held an emergency meeting in Brussels. The national security of a member state has been threatened, which is the rationale of this NATO's emergency meeting. But the solutions are not so easy to come by. NATO Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen spoke after the meeting. He argues the incident is another example of Syrian authorities' disregard for international norms and peace.
We consider this act to be unacceptable and condemn it in the strongest terms.
Rasmussen says the alliance will consider whether further action is necessary, but he didn't mention any military options. NATO members have expressed concern about the deteriorating situation in Syria, but the prospect of using military force presents too many risks given the current diplomatic approach to the Syrian conflict. The alliance will be forced to adopt a cautious stance for now. Takashi Ichinose, NHK World, Brussels.
Turkish Prime Minister Tayyip Erdogan has for the first time commented on the incident. He has issued a tough warning against any Syrian military moves near the Turkish border. Erdogan said on Tuesday the rules of engagement for Turkish armed forces have changed and any military element approaching the Turkish border from Syria that poses a security risk and danger will be treated as a military target. The Syrian government officials say it was the Turkish military plane that violated the nation's airspace.
When last year's massive earthquake hit northeast Japan, it knocked out most public transportation. In Sendai, the largest city in the region, thousands of people were left stranded. For many of them, a modern high-rise building seemed the best place to find shelter. However, various problems arose, which have spotlit the need for better planning for future. NHK World's Ryuta Seki has the story.
On the evening of the massive quake, the center of Sendai was engulfed in total darkness. There were no lights to be seen, except in one building, the Sendai Trust Tower. Drawn by the lights, crowds of people gathered inside the building. The quake that afternoon had brought the entire transportation system to a halt, stranding many visiting businessmen and tourists. Hiroshi Yoshikawa is from Tokyo. He was in Sendai on business that day. He had no idea where to find shelter until he spotted the lights in the Sendai Trust Tower.
When I saw those lights shining out of the complete darkness, I felt so relieved. I headed towards them, as if drawn by a magnet.
The 180-meter tower is the tallest building in northeast Japan. Opened just 8 months earlier, its structure was designed to absorb earth tremors. Because it houses offices and a hotel, it has a large generator that can supply enough electricity for 3 days. Thanks to Twitter and other social media, people flocked to the building. Some 3,600 people stayed there for as much as a week. Experts say the same thing would happen in Tokyo and other cities after a similar natural disaster.
If a massive quake hits a major city, it will cause power outages in most areas. But in districts with many skyscrapers, the lights are likely to stay on because modern high-rise buildings have emergency power generators. In that case, thousands of people may well flock to them, just like they did in Sendai.
Our reporter Ryuta Seki now joins us from Sendai. So Ryuta, what were the main problems that occurred after so many people converged on that Sendai high-rise?
First of all, there was not enough food or medical equipment for the evacuees. High-rise buildings like this usually stock enough water, food, and emergency supplies for the staff and tenants, but not for people from outside. It's unfeasible for them to stockpile provisions for large numbers of evacuees. Another problem was that the tower was not officially considered a public shelter.
Our building wasn't designated as an official shelter for evacuees, so that meant we didn't receive emergency supplies or other forms of aid from the authorities.
Another issue was ensuring people's safety. The management of the building was unwilling to shelter the evacuees due to worries about its legal standing if any injuries were sustained on the premises.
As the building management, we bear the responsibility. The question of whether we might be exempted from this responsibility in the event of an emergency is something that needs to be addressed.
So is anything being done to tackle these issues then?
Experts say it's vital for local authorities and companies to work together to draw up measures to ensure that people can find shelter with as little disruption as possible.
City authorities need to know ahead of time how many people can be accommodated in each of the buildings and be prepared to guide people to them following a natural disaster. At the same time, it's essential that plans are drawn up dealing with the most efficient way of utilizing the limited resources available in each area, including evacuation facilities and stockpiles of food and medicine.
The lessons learned from the situation in Sendai will be essential for planning ahead for future possible disasters, not just in other parts of Japan, but in cities all around the world.
Right, thank you very much there, Ryuta. That was Ryuta Seki, NHK World.